Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on the DLT Pilot Regime. My name is Adrian Pape. I'm a DLT consultant in the DeFi domain at Autaqy, and I have the privilege of moderating today's discussion. So we are today joined by a distinguished panel of experts who bring a wealth of knowledge on this topic and a lot of experience. So please, panelists, introduce yourselves and your companies, please, shortly.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Stephan Mögelin from BaFin. So I'm working in the supervision of financial market infrastructure. So that is typically central securities depositories and central counterparties. But I'm also focusing on the potential implication of new technologies such as DLT or blockchain to the market infrastructures and also to in terms of crypto assets or in particular electronic securities and financial instruments. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sujata Wirsching. I'm from Deutsche Börse Group. I'm in the Department of Group Regulatory Strategy. We deal with all the political topics coming from Brussels, Berlin, and Luxembourg. We have monitored the DLT pilot regime for market infrastructures very closely since the beginning in September 2020, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, my name is Carola Rathke. I'm partner at YPOG, advising game changers. So I'm a lawyer working in the regulatory field, advising all kinds of financial institutions or upcoming future potential financial institutions with BaFin applications or how to avoid to step into traps with BaFin and everything around that. So happy to be here and join this excellent panel.
Hello, my name is Michael. I'm here on diversity grounds as a middle-aged white man.
Great.
I'm the founder of 360X, co-CEO. We basically do tokenized real assets, as in art, music, and real estate. And we have applied for an extension of our application. So we are a Wertpapier Institute and are now seeking, and that's why I'm so excited, because maybe Stephan has it in his pocket, an approval for an MTF license under the new regime that both Annika and Carola talked about.
We will come back to that, surely, yeah. With the reference to the keynote we just previously covered, there are these three categories, and we have a lot of challenges still with the DLT pilot regime. With that backdrop, let's delve into the main discussion, and I'd like to kickstart our conversation by posing the first question to Stephan Mögelin. What's the interest currently in the licenses, and which of the three categories has the most interest?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So what we have seen at the European level is that there are about 15 to 20 potential applicants. So I'm saying and referring here to potential applicants because when it comes to the real application to provide or operate a DLT-SS or DLT-TSS, there's quite a minor number. So it is a single-digit number of real applicants. So that is based on specific approaches in the European member states. So there are also, besides this regulatory sandbox called DLT Pilot Regime, some other sandbox approaches by the NCA. So many of these potential applicants are at this early stage in discussion with the NCA on a fintech approach, but not officially applying for an authorization under the DLT Pilot Regime. So, yeah. And maybe just to add, from my perspective, and here the panelists can also amend and bring in their knowledge here, so it would definitely make sense to apply for a DLT TSS because most of the services provided here under the pilot regime rely on the transfer function, which is one of the main components of DLT or blockchain solution or protocols. Thank you.
Thank you for these insights. Yeah, I'd like to bring Michael Spitz into the conversation because he has a perspective on the application for a license and can tell us about it.
Sure. So first of all, I do believe that the number, whether it's 10 or 20, is actually a good number for Europe because how many new CSD applications did we see over the past decade? Not a lot. How many new MTF have actually gone? Yes, some, but we're talking a handful. So I think it's a great initiative by the EU in order to kind of move forward. Our experience so far, and it's a little bit tainted because like 1.5 years ago, we only started the process for becoming a regulated institution under Germany. So that was already the whole thing about Inhaberkontrollverfahren, like who owns you, who are the guys around you? Do you have the processes in place? Will you have the process in place? What's your business? Do you have enough funding? Do you have good shareholders? And so on and so forth. So for us, it was now clear in the very inception when we said we want to become a trading venue because there are a lot of primary issuance already out there. As Carola and Annika said in their statement, everyone is focusing on the primary business. We felt we have to deliver on the secondary side. This is where there's a real demand for customers. We always went, we don't want to circumvent, but we really want to have someone regulated. Everything we do are securities. So even when we started with some NFTs and so on, we said, this will be a security because it feels like a security. So we need to be regulated like a security. And for us, it was an Erweiterungsantrag, so an addition to what we currently have. So certain things we were relieved. And I have to say, we had a great experience so far on the right. We did our application way before we were allowed to do, because we had conversations with the regulator, both with the NCA and with Bundesbank, who already regulates us today, but also with ESMA, and saying this is what we have in mind. And what is going to happen if we make an application? You grant us this application, but the other co-players are not there, like an SS is not there, or in TSS. How can we make use of a CSD now already? And I think so far, once we kind of had the red flags gone away, April 23rd happened, and we could file our license application. And it's been a very constructive dialogue so far with both the European guys, with ESMA, but also with Bundesbank and BaFin, and saying these are our constraints. And maybe it's easier for us because we're just dealing with real assets. But at the end, it's a security, a DLT financial instrument. And I just was saying to Annika, also in addition to the 4 boxes she had, I could also draw some French blockchain, DLT financial instruments, Luxembourg, and so on. So a lot more can be traded on a DLT MTF, but it has been, I think, a great experience and very constructive from the regulatory point of view in terms of exchanging ideas. But at the end, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. So only once we get a license, I will be happy.
Thank you. And Carola, how would you consider the interplay of the institutions? Is that your experience as well, that it works quite fine?
Yeah, so as we have been part of this journey together with these people joining here on the panel, I would say yes, indeed, it is a very constructive interaction between all the different players. I absolutely agree with what Michael just said. So it was a very good and constructive journey also before the pilot regime was live. So there was already the first pre-discussion how things will exchange. There are very open discussions on still upcoming challenges. So we haven't talked about all the challenges in our kind of keynote because there are too many, but there are also from a German perspective, some additional challenges when it comes to these electronic securities because as everybody knows, you need a register for this. So this electronic securities register in order to really issue in a valid way electronic securities under German law. This is different in other European countries because we have on the securities side still very country by country regulations when it comes how securities will be validly issued. So in Germany, we need this register for it. And it is very difficult to have these kind of TSS systems or SS systems where you need this book entry or a substitution for the book entry form when you have 2 registers in parallel, because there is no clearance yet how this will be made, because when you look into the electronic securities law in the German one, it says that there is only 1 security register allowed. And how does it interplay then with this book entry form of registry, even if it's done on the blockchain? You would have 2 registers. So there are still, I think, some open issues to clarify. So the interim solution where it is at least a very open discussion between different parties from a German perspective, because ESMA doesn't care about this because it's a just national topic, is to maybe allow these kind of settlement systems systems to apply for a register license as ancillary service, because we know this concept of ancillary services for different services, and therefore it would make sense to allow these kind of systems to offer these kind of register services or registry services alongside, at least when it comes to the instrument issued on and put into book entry on their system. So not a general allowance, but at least a limited additional ancillary service license.
Great, so we've heard something about the challenges, but in our preparatory call we also heard there's a lot of benefits of the DLT pilot regime. So what's new? What would you say?
Yeah, yes, from the opportunities perspective, maybe to start with that and then going to the challenges, I have also some. From the opportunity side, I think the policymaker on the European level has made a good step forward, because putting the DLT pilot regime as a sandbox, so it's testing innovation, making experience with the systems, allowing for trading and settlement on DLT, having exemptions to the existing regulation, MiFID, MiFIR, and on the trading side, and CSDR, the settlement, the rules on security settlement depositories, to kind of allow new entrants to give to have exemptions on these quite heavy requirements. That's already a good move. So you have testing capacities. You learn the experience on not only from market participants but also from supervisors and regulators. So this is really new. It's harmonizing the European rules. So it's for all over Europe. So it's a regulation, so applied to all member states. This is also an opportunity. So you wouldn't have the different national rules, but one kind of European rule. The retail aspect is already mentioned. In the traditional world, we have B2C customers. We normally do not accept retail clients directly to the regulated market. So this is also new from our perspective. So the B2C concept. Obviously, the innovation comes also with quite a lot of safeguard requirements, which are very common in our financial market regulation. We have this in the CSDR regulation, as mentioned, and also in the MiFID regulation. But the DLT pilot is a regime light. No? Annika mentioned it. Is it a MiFID light? So hopefully it is a MiFID light. Yeah. Coming to the challenges, obviously, the sandbox regime was a concept with limited time frame, so it's only for 6 years. ESMA will write a report how many applicants there are, whether this is successful or not, and then the policymaker can decide whether it's stopped. That's the first alternative. If there are not too many companies, if there are many companies entering into the pilot regime, then the pilot regime will be continued, or the experience which we learn in the 6 years will be adjusted into the existing CSDR regulation or into the existing MiFID regulation. So there are 3 variables where we see how this from a policy perspective could go. Another challenge is obviously the mentioned thresholds. They have been heavily negotiated in the political process. There were some companies saying, okay, the thresholds are too low. Others said, okay, that they are too high. So that was a middle ground on the political side. We will see how this goes. And obviously, in this experience, we will see whether this, when it's continued, then the thresholds need to be increased, obviously, to get real scaling in this business. Then, for us as regulated market infrastructure, it was always a question of, we have existing rules, do we play along the existing rules, or do we enter in a pilot regime with these limited thresholds and limited timeline, which brings legal uncertainty. Stop here.
And if we are thinking about a broader scope, what do you think, what's your opinion on the embedding of the DLT pilot regime in the EU digital strategy? I think that was Carola's idea as well in the preparatory call.
Yeah, I think we touched this a bit, but maybe also a good question for Stephan to talk about, because he was part of this entire discussion, I think, on the European level. So I think it is exactly what we said. So it's this trading venue parameter topic we have discussed for in our keynote, where you have different rules now for multilateral systems. So this is one of the topics that needs or have some kind of interplay with this DLT pilot regime, because when you qualify a lot of platforms now as multilateral system, this means that the platforms where retail customers are currently trading via different license. So it's just a RTO license, a remittance and remission of orders. It's an Anlagevermittlungslicense in German terms. If you don't allow it anymore but qualify it as multilateral system, which means that there are just limited forms of it, which are exchanges, MTFs and OTFs, this organizational trading facility. We have a problem for the retail market, because then it means that you need intermediaries again in order to allow the retail client. And therefore, I think this is closely connected to the idea of the pilot regime, because pilot regime, as we said before, allows retail customers to trade on MTFs. But maybe, Stephan, you can add your view on it, because I think you were part of all the entire digital setup on the EU level.
Yeah, thank you. So what we can say is that the DLT pilot regime was only part of the EU digital finance package, and indeed what is heavily discussed also is potential implications of MiCA, so everything from a regulatory perspective around crypto assets. But what is important to note that MiCA also refers to a distinction between crypto assets in the meaning of MiCA and typical financial instruments where we already have a regulatory framework. And here what is really, from my perspective, is a good sign, and what is positive for the market is that the DLT pilot regime really allows to have specific exemptions from the existing regulatory framework to allow testing innovation, but also what is acknowledged by the European legislator, that there is some kind of a need to have or to gain experience also from all stakeholders, and that also includes us as supervisor. And therefore, I think that is a really good sign, and that is already applicable and can be used to apply for the operation of specific DLT market infrastructures to test DLT solutions, and what is really some kind of different to what we have as centralized operated systems with as you said, with a large variety on regulatory provisions. But what we have here is that we can, or that the applicant can apply for specific exemptions and providing so-called compensatory measures to really adjust the regulatory setting to a need which is based on the DLT used for providing such services, and which also aims to fulfill the requirements of the standard regulatory provisions. So that is really interesting, and I guess that it is also going forward. You referred also to the period. It is only limited in time, but if there are applicants and there's a market interest, that could drive innovation, and we can see that not only some kind of market fragmentation, there's some need for interoperability and integration between different types of services and also technical solutions, but we have it here at hand. And also maybe coming briefly back to the mentioned threshold, so at least for all market participants, there's also a possibility to have partly issuance. So I do not have to refer for specific issuance with a full issuance in one CSD or in a DLT SS. So I can use some part of an issuance to go to a DLT TSS in scope of the pilot regime, and also test potential DLT solutions. So that is also an interesting point here. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, any remarks?
No, I think it cannot be underestimated how huge DLT pilot regime is just one little component, but within the overall scope of the digital finance package, it is really great what politicians had at least envisioned to keep Europe competitive, because as we see at the moment around the world, a lot of the other jurisdictions that do not have that in place are all saying, this is a security, this is not allowed, you go to jail, 8 years, 5 years, and so on. So I think it's a great idea that we have that. And depending on how you look at it from a startup or from an incumbent, you can apply to the pilot regime or to MiCA for that matter. You know, on the one hand, you're saying, okay, it is only for 6 years, so it's not worth the effort, because once I start my own process at a large organization, 4 years already happened by the time I selected my advisor, before I selected lawyers, before they made the application, and then it's gone. But if you're a small company, you kind of think, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and you have opportunities to either say, this allows me and that's not us now, but the pilot regime allows you, how does a world look without a CSD? Theoretically, that's possible in the pilot regime. How does a world look like without broker-dealers? It's also possible. How does a trading venue operate without a trading venue? Now, maybe that's difficult, but you could embed certain things on a smart contract in order to get there. And by giving access to retail customers, it is a totally new possibility. Now, of course, you don't want to open it up and saying this is now the new role and all rules are off. But you give the possibility to review. I think after 3 years, there's going to be a review in the process where people can say, hey, this went good, this went bad, let's more focus on that side. And I think it's a great process that we as Europeans can now see experiencing in that within still not jeopardizing the market stability and putting risk to our system when we're having conversations on many other fronts, how we are dealing with settlement times and so on and so forth. So I think it's a great opportunity even for niche market players to try something out. And there are other sandboxes in the UK and in Switzerland, but I think from a European and coordinating perspective, it's a great thing, and I would love to see a collaboration maybe with a French institution, SS, in order then to have really the stepping stone for capital markets union.
And do you also think it's an opportunity to get Clearstream replaced?
No.
No.
You looked at my shareholder. I cannot say that.
And it's not that easy to replace Clearstream, by the way.
Okay, coming to the disadvantages, is probably the scope of the whole project a little bit too small, and is it also too late? What's your take on that?
Actually, comparing it to other international jurisdictions, it's not too late. We are early in the process. No? We were quite a fast mover with the digital financial packets, with DORA, markets and crypto asset regulation, and also on the DLT pilot regime. Even in Germany, we're even before the EU wave, so to say. So I wouldn't say we are late in the process from a regulatory perspective. So policymakers made the differentiation quite early. Financial instruments versus non-financial instruments. Non-financial instruments dealt in MiCA. Financial instruments in MiFID, MiFIR, if it's traditional. If it's on DLT, you have the pilot regime. So we have the elements from a policy perspective already in place. Let's see how this develops. It allows, hopefully, for innovation in Europe, and it allows, obviously, for competition, which is a good thing. It brings efficiency. And it allows us to gain experience with all the regimes and then to adapt the policy regimes or to build the business.
And I would say also from the client perspective, so we have a lot of international clients coming from the US and coming from Asia, for example. So the US clients are quite jealous currently because we have such a clear regulatory framework now in place. Of course, there are still uncertainties left because, of course, MiCA, of course, is in just upcoming in future. There are some things that need some clarification, so we will have a MiCA 2 probably in future. But nevertheless, we are categorizing now crypto assets. We are kind of distinguishing these kind of crypto assets and financial instruments. So I'm talking about MiFID 2 financial instruments. All of these instruments in future will be regulated under MiFID 2 terms and all the other regulations around it, so MiFIR, etc. So the MiCA, the typical crypto assets, will be regulated. Then there will be a crossover, of course, to these kind of e-money issues, because tokenized e-money is partly regulated under MiCA and still, of course, under the Payment Services Directive. But I think there are a lot of clear categories coming up with some crossover need of clarification, as always in such a starting phase. But when I look into the US, where you don't know, is it a security, isn't it not a security, is courts deciding about, oh, it could be a security or not. So I think we are way better set up in Europe. Also for Asia, I think they're taking a similar approach, trying to now categorize it. The Hong Kong regulator is very keen learning from BaFin, so they're looking to BaFin, looking to the German regulator, because we were upfront in Europe when it comes to regulation of crypto assets. So I would say there are still some other topics on the AML side, how we do our video identification or not maybe. These are challenges, but they have nothing to do with these kind of digital topics where I think we are well made for purpose if we now get BaFin applications and European applications done in a decent amount of time. So meaning that these procedures don't take too long. I think there are a lot of players interested in doing it in Europe.
Great, so definitely a point for the regulators. And what about the point that access for retail is still hardly possible?
I believe if you go beyond what it says in the law, because there, of course, in the pilot regime, you can apply for an exemption, and if it's granted, then you can have retail customers on that platform. But we have to look realistically. Although we have quite a lot of CSDs, in Europe, at least from my perspective, there are only two relevant ones, and both of them don't onboard retail customers. Because if you think about the CSD, has two issues in respect of the MTF. One, it needs to book the security in order to have it later on traded on MTF. That's relatively easy done. But then the second thing, if you ask them to run a register, they also have the KYC obligation. So I would challenge the possibility of any retail customer to open an account with Clearstream or Euroclear. I think that will be a tough push. Similarly, if you're doing that on a normal custody bank, who will basically allow its customer direct access with everything, as you would have as a broker-dealer, to a trading venue, you have, and Carola mentioned it and Annika in the beginning, so you have Oma Erna with their iPhone trying to buy 500 art tokens for €1 that she sees. On the other side, you see someone connected via Aladdin or Charles River with 17 Bloombergs in the back and moves the market in a bit, and all of a sudden the price moves from €1 to 150. Now, normally in regulated markets, you have credit lines with the others. The OMS, the EMS tools actually apply if it's a eligible counterpart. I can't even do the clock synchronization over an IP to the smartphone of Oma Erna of the Samsung S9, and she has an edge connection. And this already causes so much problems that I think only now we're getting into the possibility that maybe under the using some of the old CSD world, it will be difficult to have direct access, although legally intended. But what is the trade-off between having direct access for retail versus consumer protection? Because you can argue what's going to happen. She didn't know that it was €1. Her order was in there. She executed at 150. Normally, she trades as a trader. So maybe that will be one of the challenges. Unless we get solutions from SS to cope for this, I think it will be very difficult in a legacy world that we're not set up for this.
Good point, yeah. Coming to a conclusion, how is your outlook on the future development? Can probably each of you give us a forecast? What insights will we have after the 3 years, after the completion of the first phase of the DLT pilot regime? Probably starting with Stephan.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe, first of all, before coming to my perspective with regard to the potential prolongation of the DLT pilot regime or the implications to the European law, so what Michael already mentioned, and also what is something what we have learned so far, what is not from a business perspective, maybe scaling very fast, but what we have here based on the DLT pilot regime and the fruitful discussions we all already had so far, is that we could identify where some challenges still are, and maybe also discuss potential solutions. So as we heard, there's no direct access for retail clients to a CSD, and that is for good reason, based on a legal definition. So I would challenge that a CSD is anyway allowed to have a retail client as a participant. And the second is when we see that a DLT if one would be authorized to provide these services, also is required to have so-called delivery versus payment. So there have to be a conditioned settlement of the underlying DLT financial instrument and some kind of the cash leg. So yeah, it is introduced further instruments like central bank or commercial bank monies in tokenized form, and also the potential use of e-money tokens, but for the DLTSS and the regulatory scope of the pilot regime, that is still limited to the security side. So what will take place on a settlement in securities, and there's a linkage to legally and technically requirement to have this settlement in DVP against some kind of an institution. So being it a central bank, a commercial bank, or a paying agent, or an e-money issuer. But if there is no service provided or access granted to these DLTSS, so we would then see that it is really tough to ensure DVP against legacy systems or existing market service providers. So that is also some kind of a challenge we already have identified, and we try to address to different stakeholders, but actually we could not provide a direct solution beside ensuring higher transparency. So for example, in terms of authorized e-money institutions, so who might be a potential candidate to provide such services, and to discuss these between potential applicants, their legal service lawyer, and also to the legislator, being it national perspective or on the European side. And when it comes to the DLT pilot regime, so I would most likely assume that the pilot regime will have 6 years, not only 3 years, because we have some time for the application, and I hope also from Michael that there will be an authorization soon in time for one of the applicants. And the other is that we all have to gain experience in what is provided and based by the DLT systems which might be operated, and therefore there's still some need for this time, and if there is really the idea to provide and foster innovation, so I would say that it at least takes 6 years. And the main idea also was to not have a separate additional regulatory framework, but to incorporate it into existing law and thereby acknowledge potential amendments or adjustments required by technologies such as DLT or blockchain. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. Coming to the forecast, you have 1 minute each.
To the forecast, yes, it brings innovation, it brings competition. As whether we see a lot of DLT MTFs, DLT TSS, ideally, because we need the settlement, as we learned. Yeah, whether it's already retail, we will see. Future will tell us.
Yeah, I hope that we will see the integration into the normal regular law. So I very much hope that Europe stays up front and keeps this kind of DLT-related infrastructures. And of course, it doesn't mean that the pilot regime will be transposed one-to-one into the normal law, but that at least the ideas and parts that are working, and we will learn what has worked and what will not work for maybe retail clients and other parts. But I do hope that we will integrate this kind of infrastructure into our everyday laws and see that it moves on in future.
So October 2026, 3 years, right? What's the question? So we will have tons of other licenses, but of course also the DLT pilot regime license. By that time, it will be reviewed and retail will not be allowed anymore under the pilot regime. The name will be changed to just pilot regime, not DLT, because it will just go into instant settlement. We will be extended more beyond 6 years, and more exemptions will be granted that we haven't heard of yet in terms of new mechanism, how different matching algorithm, staking and everything is being applied into the traditional finance world. We will no longer require crypto register licenses. We still need registers. We will no longer need crypto custodian licenses because the normal custodian business will just run it. And we will have, by that time, predictive settlement. Everyone's talking now T+1, T+0. We will actually go into T-2. We will predict if things are on the chain. We can see what's happening already 2 days in advance, and that's an easy thing.
Looks like a bright future, and that's a wrap up. Thanks to my panel guests.